do much Twitch these days, but I recall you heading out. Yeah, that was, I think my last stream before I moved here was 2 places ago. It was a political podcast, I think. Right after South Carolina, and it was a Bernie versus Warren one, right? Because she hadn't dropped out yet. She didn't drop out before Super Tuesday, did she? I remember being really annoyed about that. It wasn't all that big a deal. I mean, there are things I don't like about Warren. There are things I don't like about Bernie, but that was a... It's interesting to look at that in retrospect. Actually, I'm going to finish this now, because I don't think there's any... I don't believe there's any more stars on this end, or any moons after... I'm not in the party, so it's immaterial. Well, I mean, you know, like, given what's going on right now, the Democratic primary was basically deciding our next president, so I think it matters for everyone, right? I assume you're not in an open primary state then? I mean, if you live in a closed primary state, you should just register to the party that you consider to, like, align with. Not align with, but the party who's going to run the candidate who has a chance of winning, who is the closest to your ideals. So, you know. I think it's just good. It's good to be a part of the Democratic Party because it's where it's where any power that the left will ever have, that's where it's going to be. You're never going to get rid of the two-party system because the two-party system is, like, essential to an executive democracy. We don't have coalition governments. We don't have a parliament. We don't have any of those mechanisms. So, if you want power to make change, you got to be a part of the Democratic Party. It's just like, it's not necessarily good or bad. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world, but I live in New York. I'm probably going to vote for the Green Party. I don't like them. I don't like the Green Party. I hate the Green Party. I dislike Joe Biden as well. But what am I doing? Why am I here? Just to suffer? No. I'm so good at this video game. I'm good at this video game. Oh my god, I'm so good at this video game. I, like, on a basic ethical level, despise the Green Party, but they are a zero-risk vessel for me. And I have the luxury of a protest vote that I can then leverage with leftists in swing states and basically say, hey, I am voting for the Green Party because the stakes are low and I can do it, and I'm advocating for our power. I need you to advocate for the power of those who will lose everything under a Trump presidency, which includes the left, right? Ultimately, you have to look at political realities. Like, Democrats are fine under a second Trump term. It's the left that loses everything. Democratic operatives. What do they all do now? They work for Biden's campaign. They work for the Democratic Party on state and local and federal levels. All of these people have positions in the party, running for campaigns, working for Congress people, working for members of the government, who will then go on to work in a Biden administration, and they will take their staffs with them. Everyone who will gain a position in the Biden administration already has a paid position in the Democratic Party. And that is a position that is only in higher demand against the Trump presidency. So Trump is great for Democratic fundraising, and he doesn't do anything against Democratic staffing power. So all of these career operatives, what am I doing? I need to beat this dude Reno. At the end of the day, you have to accept that, like, Trump is worse for us than it is for the Democrats, than it is for establishment Democrats. Like, career establishment Democrats, the party is a business. Every organization that involves paid staff is, at the end of the day, a business, right? So, like, a lot of people in the Democratic Party are just trying to keep their jobs. Part of the reason the Democratic Party opposed Bernie so much, even more than Warren, is that Bernie was an existential threat to their jobs. Because these are people who did not fit his agenda. Every other Democrat running in the race was to a large extent going to hire within the Democratic Party, the existing power circles, the people who had built careers there, right? And it's not to say Bernie would basically wipe the slate clean, but he wasn't going to hire anyone who wasn't valuable to his political agenda. Yeah, I wasn't one to necessarily believe this, but I have heard left-leaning veterans of the party of the party itself have basically said, yeah, this is how a decent number of Democrats operate, which is, at the end of the day, it is a job, right? And if it's a career, you're going to do what you can to keep your job while trying to affect what change you can. But like, ultimately, when your livelihood depends on it, I'm so dumb. When your livelihood depends on it, like, you're not going to sacrifice everything you've built your life, the security you've built your entire life, in order to create radical change, right? This is the like the age-old dilemma. This is the age-old dilemma of the career politician. There's value to career politicians because they know what they're doing. But at the same time, it's this is what I've been doing my entire life. I'm not going to throw it away over some universal healthcare plan. Oh, I have to be looking at him. Not the whole party, but enough of the party, right? The Democratic Party is not a monolith. I just made a video about this, actually, on my podcast page. It's called Establishment Democrats. Oh, Democrats don't want the left to vote for Joe Biden. And it's kind of true. That ultimately, when we refuse to vote for Joe Biden, it is very much something that establishment Democrats want us to do. Because if we make ourselves a part of Joe Biden's constituency, then we make ourselves people that he has to listen to, or that he feels any form of incentive to listen to. I'm gonna get this now because I'm not coming back here. We as anyone, really. We as anybody. It's funny that I say we because technically I vote in every election. Basically, anybody who is unlikely to vote, but if they voted would never vote Republican, right? So basically, progressives, young people, young working class people. That's the we I'm talking about. So let's say Trump wins a second term. 99% of the people who work in a Biden administration are already senior members of the Democratic Party. Obviously, they want power because they have political agendas they want to affect. Which, those political agendas are better than Trump's, but they're worse than the ones that I have, right? So if they lose to Trump, they're fine. They're just going to keep fundraising, they're going to keep staffing, they're going to keep working on their stuff. Their power does not go down, it stays the same. They want to win an election to gain power. But if they lose, their power stays the same. Their stuff? Yeah. Let's say paid family leave. That's probably a position that's a good position that all Democrats share, is that paid family leave should be a thing. Paid family leave, some level of extremely incremental campaign finance reform, public option healthcare, middle ground target between insane Trump and modern progressive target. Yeah, so public option healthcare. That's probably that's a great example. A public option is possible to institute in virtually any healthcare environment. Like, it's plausible. But if you want Medicare for all, you have to have the mechanisms in place. You have to have expanded Medicaid. You have to have a strong Medicare system. One strong public healthcare system. Because it is extremely ambitious and it requires a lot of bureaucracy already in place. You have to build to it. That's kind of what AOC was talking about in her interview that a lot of progressives were angry at. But maybe we can debate the wisdom of talking about incrementalism in the middle of a campaign, but she wasn't wrong, right? You're going to have a public option before you have Medicare for all. Whoa, this camera's way. Yeah, that's much better. But the reason that someone like me supported Bernie Sanders and does not support Joe Biden is that, doesn't support Joe Biden in a primary, is that Biden wants to stop at It's not just that he's stopping at achievable goals. He is stopping at immediately achievable goals, right? Like, we're not going to have Medicare for all for the next 10 years. But this is the short-term thinking dilemma, right? Like, if you don't start thinking long-term at some point, the long-term will stay the long-term. You have to think about goals after the next 10 years, because that timer, right? If there's a hypothetical timer on what is achievable, or how long something will not be achievable, that timer doesn't start until you actually start planning to make it achievable, right? So you have to start thinking about, yes, we need Medicare for all. We need a single-payer healthcare system. Making that a part of the conversation is extremely beneficial, because once you start getting people used to the idea that we can have universal healthcare in this country, that reduces the rights options by a lot. By a lot. I think you're just less likely to get popular consensus, though, if it's clear you went more than what you were asking for. Are you, though? When Medicare was first passed, so Lyndon Johnson passed the first Medicare bill, the Medicare Act. And before he passed it, the concept was introduced by to the American people by JFK before he died. And when JFK introduced Medicare, he was saying, this is going to be a healthcare system for seniors. But I have no intention of letting it stop at seniors, thank God. Like he said, I have no intention of letting it stop there. It's not just going to be healthcare for seniors. They're just the test vessel. This is going to be a healthcare system that we use to ensure all Americans. Medicare for all was the intended endpoint of Medicare, and it passed accordingly. I don't think you lose ground. I don't think you lose negotiating power by saying that something is intended to be more than what you're getting right now, right? When you say a public option is going to become Medicare for all, that doesn't lose you power. It's not like you're saying this is going to be universal healthcare, but you're saying this is an essential step toward universal healthcare. This is the next step of JFK's plan. It's just more polarizing. Yeah, but it's polarizing in a way that, like, there are things that are polarizing in a good way. Kind of like the Affordable Care Act did, right? Like, it forced Republicans to show that they are against people having health care. Since Obamacare was introduced, Republicans have been forced to show just how anti-worker, how bigoted, how class warfare oriented they are. And they've kept their base, and they're solidifying and strengthening their base. But the reason they keep legislative power is that they continue to expand gerrymandering and suppress voter rights. Voter suppression is how they continue to amass power, because they cannot find more supporters. They cannot build their supporter base. People don't want to vote for them. That's why they have to ramp up gerrymandering, ramp up voter suppression. Trump was an enigma, right? He was able to do something that Republicans hadn't been able to do for 8 years, which was get people who are not loyal Republican voters to vote for him. And equally, get people who would ordinarily vote Democrat not to vote for Hillary. That was equally important. And Hillary was a historically unpopular candidate, right? It's kind of this weird thing where it's like, only Trump could have beaten Hillary, and only Hillary could have lost to Trump, in a sense. Where I do genuinely think she would have beaten any other Republican nominee, and Trump would have lost to any other Democratic nominee. He was like there's that one Pokemon that like you take to counter like one very other specific Pokemon. That's what I'm thinking of right now. Biden about to make that 2 for 2? Nah, I don't think so. I don't think Biden had a 0% chance even before Corona, but it just seemed Democrat voters seem not to want to vote for him. Yeah, we don't, but we will. The only thing any Democrat needs to do is get people who don't like Trump to come out and vote. And COVID is going to make damn sure of that, right? Anything Biden can do to get people unenthusiastic about him is basically being countered by coronavirus. That's kind of the... Hi, ugly kid. How's it going? I apologize. We're talking politics, so I apologize in advance if that's not if that's not a thing, a meme you enjoy. But it is a thing that we talk about on the stream. Just fair warning. I mean, you're absolutely right. Biden is an extremely unexciting person. But anyone telling you that he cannot beat Trump, like, I may be wrong that he's very, 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 very favored to beat Trump. I don't think I am. Otherwise, I wouldn't say that I believed it. But anyone telling you that he has no chance is clueless or a hack. Yeah, Biden's unexciting. But the only reason a Democrat needs to be exciting is that he needs... The way that a Democrat wins the election is getting people who don't like Trump to come out and vote. That's all you need to do. And basically, COVID is doing Biden's job for him. That's why I think Biden is very, very, very well favored to win this in a way that Hillary could never have been. Of course, you know, that's what I thought about Hillary. That's what I thought when the Access Hollywood tape came out, right? So, who knows? Lots of loud progressive shitting on him hard, though. Pardon my French. I worry about how that affects him, about how that affects things. I think that we, like, as progressives, as, you know, one of the reasons that the left was able to boost its voice so much is that we are extremely arrogant and we have to be overconfident because that's the only way that we stay motivated to continue putting forward a message. I think it's good to adapt to new information, right? It's good to think you're more powerful than you are when you're trying to build power because there's no sense getting demoralized when you're trying to build power. But the reality of it is, like, Medicare for all is not like a unifyingly popular policy. It's more popular than I think centrists think it is. But it's definitely less powerful than we think it is, right? I don't think progressives getting angry at Joe Biden is going to do anything. If it was obvious the choice it would be law. Well, it doesn't have to be unobvious to be unpopular. The choice between Trump and Hillary was obvious, but Trump's president. At the end of the day, like, yes, I think that there is objective reasoning that single-payer healthcare is the most realistic, is the only defensible healthcare system to be aiming for. That is the most realistic, right? I think every other form of universal healthcare is harder to achieve in America, which is why I think Medicare for all is actually the smartest thing to go for. Please? Heck you. I don't think progressives have the power to damage Joe Biden. Like, I don't think they did much damage to Hillary. Right? Like, I missed the Y press. Anyone who thinks that, in my opinion, anyone who thinks that the left is capable of doing something that the right isn't already equipped to do in terms of campaign smear tactics, like, I don't think they've been paying attention to the right over the last 20 years. This is how the right has kept power for 20 years, is through dirty tactics, by smearing their opponents. Yeah, and progressives don't vote, right? Democrats don't fear us because we don't vote. Let's turn out for a couple of campaign cycles. Let's turn out to vote for our own darn candidate. The youth turnout for Bernie was atrocious. It was indefensibly low. Until that changes, like, we're not going to have power. I do think there's value in anti-electoralism, that, like, there are other vessels of power. But, like, ultimately, you need leaders. You need people in charge who care about you. You need J-Pauls and AOCs, and you need, you know... And you need more of them, because right now the Progressive Caucus is kind of failing us. You can't put that much power in a single person's hands, ever. Are more socially powerful than politically mostly work on social norms? Not really. Like, I'm presuming, correct me if I'm wrong, that when you say social progressivism, you're talking about kind of SJW culture, right? Like, the idea of, like, you know, respecting people's pronouns, of individuals saying, like, hey, you know, this was kind of racist. That's kind of what I was interpreting it as. Maybe vegans like vegan activists, right? that kind of stuff. And political progressivism largely seems to be more material fiscal progressive fights, right? Fighting for things like Medicare for all, fighting for things like labor unions and worker rights. And obviously criminal justice reform is a form of political progressivism, but criminal justice reform it's material, but it's also rooted in social progressivism because it's about race. It's about non-class related injustices. It's heavily intersectional, but it is material, right? It's difficult because social has two different meanings, right? There's a broad term social that generally, like social justice, generally refers to covering and describing all aspects of society. And then there's also social meaning as opposed to fiscal. I wouldn't describe social as exempting anything. Okay, so when you talk about social progressivism, are you also talking about things like the Peace Corps and not the Salvation Army because they're super anti-gay? Group behavior? I wouldn't say that form of progressivism is all that popular either, right? I think that things like gay rights, so abortion rights are overwhelmingly popular. Gay rights are overwhelmingly popular. It's all reruns. Kind of, but also not, right? Like, I think all forms of hate and reactionaryism are all reruns because tribalism is the world's oldest and most tired trope, in my opinion. I don't think there's anything new about the kinds of bigotry that we display now versus the kinds of bigotry we displayed 2,000 years ago. We've always disliked people who are darker than us for some reason. I don't know why. That's just a human condition. That like the fairness of your skin has always been a pursuable virtue, and maybe it's just like millennia of epigenetics, right? That we just keep on passing it down. That like maybe it's heavily socially ingrained. Maybe there's a neurological bias. Either way, it's stupid. The people you're near, you're like, and being in the same physical location kind of forces shared goals. Yeah, I think that's socialized politics in general, right? Like, I went to NYU, so I'm going to have certain beliefs about life. I think that what you're referring to as social progressivism seems more powerful because it's more concentrated, right? When you venture into legislated progressivism, it's going to be weaker because on a national level, it is more open to undermining influences, so to speak. So like, NYU doesn't have to get Senate Republicans to vote for its Title IX laws. So social progressivism seems more powerful because it's bubbled outside of the law. So it's not actually that powerful. It just seems more powerful than it necessarily is, I think. Oh my dear sweet lord. You know what?
Surprise, motherfucker.
I hate this game so much sometimes. Groups run to homogeneity in physical areas. Generally, yeah. I think it's the kind of homogeneity matters, right? But typically, yeah, I don't disagree. That some form of homogeneity, right? And we break out, it's more real on TV than on the streets. I wouldn't say it's necessarily only real on TV, but it's media presents to those of us who did grow up in a bubble this vision of the world that is equally bubbled, right? And that's harmful. Hey, Man Mud. The Odysseying is going well. And that's equally a problem because the images we see in media of quote unquote progressivism are also, they're designed to make us feel satisfied with the level of political activism that we engage, right? So it's like, oh, you you support Roe v. Wade and you said Black Lives Matter on Facebook, and that counts as activism, right? That's a bias that a lot of like East Coast, very academia bubbled liberals have. And that's a harmful bias because that's not activism, right? Posting on Facebook isn't activism. So what media winds up doing is it reinforces those beliefs that we have, right? Those really problematic beliefs where like educated liberals are all talk season 4. Well, that was one of the problems of Aaron Sorkin's media writing, especially, was that like he was the king of being well spoken is enough to demonstrate your liberal bona fides, right? Like I still like most of his work, but the truth is that he empowered and enabled an entire generation of liberal political hobbyism. And that's a problem. Political hobbyism is better than ignorant copy paste from dad and mom. It is better than fake news, yes, but it's still bad information. Remember Destiny's rant about how bad information is worse than no information at all? Oh, this is from way back. Thinking that you are accomplishing more in politics than you are, in political activism than you are, is bad information. Yes. Hypothesis has been tested. It's not as bad information as like literal fake news. Oh my god, don't die. All right. But it's still bad information, and it's very, very harmful. An inaccurate view of the world, kind of, yes, but more importantly, it's it's an economic principle, right? You The problem isn't one actor acting in an irrational way or with bad information. The problem is that everyone acts this way. It's a human cognitive bias. It's a sociological issue. That when everyone thinks that they're doing more than they are, there's a massive deficit of good being done. And people are satisfied with their individual behavior, so it never gets fixed. I would liken it to market failure in economics, which it is. It's a form of market failure, which is, oh my God. You don't have to explain how hallucinations are usually inconvenient. Yeah, but the thing about hallucinations is that they cause material harm to the individual or to their immediate environment, one or the other, right? Let's see if I can do this. That's fine. Oh my God. And if an individual person is operating like, if someone is in a state of psychosis and it's not doing harm to anyone, typically society is less incentivized to fix that. You poop. Typically, we will just let people operate in their psychoses if it's not. For example, like look at SJ9 or Avalo, or XJ9 rather. I'm not sure if you know who either of those people is. One is a League streamer who was clearly operating with like a warped sense of reality. And then Avalo was also someone in the... Oh my God, I'm so dumb. I think I'm just going to take the football guy. You know what? No, I'm not. I think I can do this without taking any damage. I just have to play really safe. Yes, a journey into the mind of XJ9. He didn't... Well, I guess it's a form of doxing. He didn't exactly dox her. He did something arguably worse. He leaked certain photos that she had given him while they were in a relationship. That people tend to only address psychoses when they start to cause a real harm to that person or their environment. I guess you could argue that it always causes harm to the person. So this is kind of that situation where it's like thinking you're being more politically active than you are isn't causing immediate harm to your environment, but it's part of a larger system. It's part of a systemic failure where everyone is operating the same way as you are, or a lot of people are operating the same way as you are. It's a macroeconomic failure. So that's the thing, is that people don't have the incentive to fix it because there's no immediate harm being done to you. That's what's called an externality, is that the harm that your behavior is doing exists outside of your ecosystem. And so there's no incentive to address it. It's the same way the financial crash happened, right? Is that banks taking on $10 million of risk is only going to lead them to account for the $10 million of risk, or let's say $10 trillion of risk. A single bank taking on $10 billion of risk. Yeah, it's a side effect external to your, when I give out $10 billion in bad loans as a single bank, I'm going to account for $10 billion in risk. But that $10 billion is risk that I'm passing on to every single person who invests in my bank. That's why it's called moral hazard. Because it's hazard that other people are taking on that I am making them take on without their knowledge or consent. It's the same concept, right? So anyway, back to why it's a really stupid political move to refuse to vote for Joe Biden. Because the fact of the matter is that you don't necessarily need Obamacare to institute a public option. You don't need a healthy Obamacare to institute a public option in the same way that you need in the same way that you need a public option to institute Medicare for all. The Obamacare site exists, the marketplace exists. That's all you need to institute a public option. On the other hand, Medicare for all, you can't fight for it when healthcare is in shambles and Republicans are using it to talk about how terrible government healthcare is. So centrist policies are way easier to fight for in a broken system than progressive policies, because you're basically progressives are going to be stuck with the task of restoring what we lost while trying to fight for something bigger, right? A better example is Roe v. Wade. If Roe v. Wade gets overturned, Democrats are fine because that pretty much is the extent of their activism. They're like, yeah, we care about abortion rights, but they don't really fight hard for Planned Parenthood. They kind of fight for it, right? But like, not to the extent that progressives consider paid family leave to be the baseline. Democrats consider it to be the end goal, or centrist Democrats rather. So we're not going to be able to re-empower Planned Parenthood if abortion rights are defunct. Democrats, however, can just fight for Roe v. Wade because that's what their fundraising point is. In fact, their fundraising goes through the roof if Roe v. Wade gets overturned. That's not to say they want it to be overturned. It's that they don't lose much from it being overturned in terms of political power. So yes, the Democrats lose things in terms of their political agenda, but the left loses even more because we lose our ability to affect a political agenda plus any potential to grow our power, which only exists within the Democratic Party. Where do you see the country in 4 years? Not going to be typing for a bit. FML. It's fine. Where do I see the country in 4 years? I don't know, man. I really don't know. That's a tough. I don't know where I see my life in 4 years, to be honest. I think I'm just figuring that out. The truth is, I think it's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult keeping the White House in 2024, in my opinion. I think there's a very good chance that we get someone either almost as bad as Trump or far worse, in my opinion. Or maybe even Trump himself, right? Like, I think there's a good chance Trump comes back in 2024. He's not going anywhere. He's going to be campaigning. He's going to be fundraising. He's going to be doing rallies. Like, this is the sense of importance that all of the money in the world could never have gotten him. I don't think. Obviously, he doesn't want to have the responsibilities of being president, but the prestige, I don't think he lets go of that, ever. I don't think it's just that he's running for president because he feels like he has to. I think that yes, he hates being president in all of the ways that it requires responsibility and accountability, but I think that we need to be very honest about there are aspects of the job there are aspects of the position that he still very much loves and will fight to protect and fight to keep, right? And that he's not just running because it would be an admission that he was wrong not to run. He's specifically running because he wants to keep the title. Can you still do 3 terms? No. But if you lose re-election, you can come back and run for a second term anytime. So if you lose your re-election bid, you can come back anytime. Biden is favored. I think Biden is it will take a monumental series of political errors that is completely within their ability, but it will take a huge level of political malpractice for the Democrats to lose this election. I think that if not for coronavirus, it would have been very, very, very well favored for Trump, just because, mostly because the recession is not happening quickly enough to be very, very callous about it. I'd like to say of course, I'm going to make a disclaimer that I'm not saying that I'm in favor of a recession. I'm not saying that I like coronavirus, right? And I would even go so far as to say that of course, I would probably rather we not have coronavirus in a recession and do get 4 more years of Trump. I would definitely rather, I would probably trade 4 more years of Trump for no coronavirus. But, the fact of the matter is coronavirus is a reality. The recession is a reality. The market crash is a reality. We're going to go into the worst depression in history, probably. That's a reality. And that's a huge gift politically to the Democrats. Do you have any evidence that can convince you? They're never in history has someone mismanaged a pandemic. Every party that has ever overseen a recession has lost power in the next presidential election. That, I'm pretty sure, is incontroverted fact. Without exception. Jimmy Carter lost to Reagan because of a recession, largely. The Republican Party lost the White House in 2008 because of a recession. Herbert Hoover lost the White House because of a recession. No party has ever survived a recession in the White House. Or a significant recession, let's say. I don't know about, regular recessions. There have been a lot of recessions, but, a huge recession on this, but incumbents never lose. That's absolutely not true. It's 5 times that a president has lost re-election. Okay, no, that's fair. That makes sense. But again, look at the circumstances surrounding the people who lost. So I will tell you this, and I will bet money on this. I don't know it for sure, but I would bet money that this is true. The vast majority of people who lost re-election, Trump is dealing with circumstances that are extremely analogous to what they dealt with, what most experts say caused them to lose the election. And the other thing I will guess is that none of the people who won re-election were dealing with the level of systemic failure, the sheer overwhelming number of factors that Trump is up against right now. If not for COVID, those factors would be significantly fewer. But this is a global crisis. I don't have faith anymore that doing a bad job means being voted out. I mean, that's fine, but at this point, you are going against... Yeah, but you asked for evidence, right? At this point, you are going against global evidence. Every single factor that causes someone to lose a re-election bid is lining up, and to a greater extent than it did in the past when people would lose because of it, right? If you want to say that evidence no longer applies, you can go ahead and say that. And I'm not saying you're wrong necessarily, but the evidence does disagree with you. If we are using any form of empirical measurement, the bets are that Trump is going to lose re-election. And one of the natural responses is, well, the bets were that Hillary was going to win as well. But the truth is that, in hindsight, there were plenty of factors that showed that Hillary could very well lose the election. And still, it was heavily luck-based. There were many, many, many things that had to work in disfavor of Hillary, that had to work against Hillary Clinton in order for her to lose, despite her being a historically unpopular candidate. Holy moly. Jesus, has this guy been doing Pilates or something? Finally. This guy's been on Atkins. That hitbox. Maybe it's just because I was really, really, really high. It's just a sense I have that we need to learn new things and the rules are changing. I've never found history to be very convincing. History is very, very, very convincing. There is nothing happening now that there is so much happening now that we should have learned from, in 32, in both our election and the German election, right? In how the Third Reich grew power, in how Nazis grew power in Germany, and a lot of those parallels are there. The lessons exist in history. There's plenty to be learned that we're just not, like, the problem is that we all have selective reasoning, right? If you talk to any lefty like me, we're going to say that the lesson to be learned was that the German centrist party was the reason that Hitler gained power, which it was, right? But then there's also the ineffectiveness of the communists to form a coalition with the Hindenburg government, right? Like, that's also, a centrist would say that, right? Like, there are plenty of lessons to be learned. I think our mistake isn't that history isn't a good predictor. History is a very good predictor. The issue is that in the moment we're terrible at learning lessons. It could happen, you know, like Trump could win. How do we determine which historical factors to pay attention to? Well, yeah, that's something that we can only really know in retrospect, right? But, like, it is ubiquitous and quite frankly objective that every single aspect of Trump's current circumstance correlates directly. I don't know why I did that. I'm going to have to redo that. You can probably discount the hair color of prior presidents. Yes, but, like, the performance of an economy and the state of global crisis, these are empirically demonstrated predictors because they directly influence voting choice. Stagnant wage is what caused Obama to lose the White House to Trump, which is what it was. It was a referendum on Obama's presidency as much as it was a referendum on Hillary. Well, you know, actually, American presidents have actually been pretty tall in recent years. Wages used to go up. Yes. Believe it or not, they did. Leaders. Napoleon wasn't, okay? Napoleon was a short king. He was the original short king. But this is the point of correlation does not equal causation, right? But there are demonstrably causal links. Stagnant wages are one, right? That's why in a big recession, people vote against the incumbent, because stagnant wages, and that's why people vote against Obama. Because wages started to go up for a bit when we recovered from the recession, or it looked like they were going up because people were getting their jobs back. So wages were going from zero back to what they were. And then people realized, hey, wages aren't increasing from what they were 10 years ago. At that point, they were like, okay, we need new leadership. So when everyone's losing their jobs and 30 million people are unemployed, if we're at 30% unemployment, like, there is absolutely no empirical indicators to suggest that an incumbent has any chance of winning the White House, of winning re-election under those circumstances. That's not to say it can't happen. I'm saying if it does happen, it's a historical anomaly. And it's a demonstrator of new forms of evidence, which are possible, but you can't make predictions based on evidence that you don't know exists, right? No voter does that calculus, maybe on unemployment. No voter does that calculus, but mass unemployment affects everyone. It affects everyone. And if 30% of the country is unemployed, that's 30% of the country that's 30% of the country whose income has gone down by at least 25%. At least 25%. They do that calculus. If I was making minimum wage, which was already a poverty wage, and barely managing to feed my family, and now my unemployment checks, which the government is doing their best to withhold from me, cover 40 to 50 to 75 to 0% of my previous wages, that's a calculus I'm doing. Yes, the people who kept their jobs, their voting patterns may not change. Most of them won't, right? But 30% of the country, you know what? I'm not getting paid enough. I'm voting Democrat next time. But we're not talking about your Republican friends. We're talking about swing voters. Your Republican friends are going to vote Republican, right? It takes a very small number of people to influence an election. We saw it in 2000 and we saw it in 2016. Al Gore lost because of 200 people in Florida. Hillary Clinton lost, Al Gore lost because of 250 people in Florida and a corrupt Republican favoring justice system. And Hillary Clinton lost because of 30,000 people spread across 3 states. For reference, that is 30,000 people. What is that? That's 0.2% of the workforce, right? 150 million, so 1.5 million by another 100, which is 0.01. It's 0.02% of the workforce. And maybe 30% of those workers are not counted in the labor force. They're not counted in the labor force, but their employment status and their income level does influence their vote, even if you're not in the labor force. So yeah, it takes a very, 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 very small number of swing voters to influence an entire election. So when 30% of the workforce is out of work, that's a lot of people. It takes it takes a tiny number of those people to change their voting behavior. Very, 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 very tiny. You've met your match, Koopa. So other evidence for Biden being favored? Okay. I would argue that Trump has lost way more support than he will ever be able to gain because of how historically unpopular he is. Biden at least has the ability to convince people to vote for him to some extent, which is something you cannot really say to the same extent for Trump. I think that was always going to be getting... The more Trump is in charge, the less popular he gets. He can only win by preventing other people from voting, which is why Biden is a terrible choice in a vacuum, is that he makes it very easy to discourage people from voting. But in the same vein, he's a very difficult... Trump is an even more difficult person to vote for, right? It's basically a race to the bottom. That's what it is. That's what Biden versus Trump is. It's a race to the bottom for who can get less support. It's really sad, but it's just the reality of what we've turned our political system into. Has popularity been going down with each new president, though? No. George Bush was... I think George Bush was even more unpopular than Trump at his lowest. But he had a lower low than Trump, but Trump on average has been the least popular president. I don't think Trump has ever been over 50% in national averages, which every other president has been at some point. Bush had it right after 9/11, and he had it right at the start of the war in Iraq. That's part of why Trump wants to start a war. The problem is that his base doesn't want him to, but there's a massive, and most would argue that it's a causal link. There's a massive correlation between the start of a war and the popularity of a president. 2 out of 2 choose at one point. Yes, that was a nice meme. That was one of the coolest. That was probably like, that was the one unironically cool thing that Bush did, was dodge that shoe. Listen, I will still say that George Bush was the worst from an outcome and total harm perspective. Maybe that changes after COVID, but in terms of malicious harm, George Bush was the worst president of the modern era. He ran an economy into the ground and started a war that killed with a body count into the millions. That is an unforgivably bad presidency. His was a genuinely evil administration. The decider. I'm the decider. One of the great qualities of a leader, one of the qualities of a great leader, is the ability to think like your enemies. And yesterday, Colin Powell told me that my mind was full of Shiites, and the people laughed like they were confident in their leader. I do remember. I remember everything. That families are just good branding? I think, America has, to a much smaller extent, thankfully, English, the same problem that India does, which is we need heroes, right? Like, we don't want effective politicians. We don't just want effective politicians. We want them to be like we're like craving politicians to be like our parents as well. It's really it's really sad that we can't just say, you know what, you're here to do a job, we're hiring you. I think that's why Trump caught on so well. Political dynasty works out because Americans want to form like a parasocial attachment to their political leaders, right? It's the Twitch effect. Politicians are basically Twitch streamers before they were cool. Because politicians are, for someone you don't know, a politician is extremely like causally linked to your welfare. So it is natural to form like an unhealthy attachment. It's a natural reaction to form a pretty unhealthy attachment to them, right? Trump OnlyFans. He'd do it if he had to. I mean, that's the problem in India, and that's why fascists are in power in India right now, is that the Congress Party is completely feckless because they never got over their political dynasty. They had about 3 generations of pretty effective leaders, and yes, Indira Gandhi was an authoritarian and a horrible person, but she was a very effective leader, which is part of why she refused to give up power, because she felt like power was best off in her hands. So she refused to acknowledge the legitimacy of elections. But Indira Gandhi specifically just expanded her power because she wanted power. Now, she may have thought her reasons were good, but ultimately, and this is the problem with the Indian political dynastyism in general, is that the Gandhis spent their entire political tenure, so to speak, believing that they would always be the power brokers. So yeah, listen, like, if I have to bet on it, I'm going to bet for Joe Biden. I think he has a really good chance of winning, and I think that is a very good thing. I think that other politicians would have been better. I think that Democrats have gotten really bad at leveraging the things that historically work against Republicans, and that's part of why I thought Bernie was a better choice than Biden to run against Trump. But also, I have a lot of motivated reasoning. Nobody thinks Joe's the best choice. A lot of people think Joe's the best choice. That's why they voted for him. That's the sheer reality of it. And I still do think that if not for COVID-19, like in a world before coronavirus, aside from Bernie, I thought Joe Biden was the best choice. Because you needed somebody with that populist appeal. Joe Biden's a fake populist, but he has the appeal in a way that no other establishment Democrat did. Yeah, he's basically like Trump, right? He's a fake populist. He doesn't stand for working class ideals, at least not in any significant way. But he comes off like that, and that helps him politically. Obviously it does, right? Well, he has the massive advantage of being the only person who vocally hates politics who also has... Who, Biden? Yeah, that's the thing. That's the thing about Biden, and that's why the Tara Reade allegations are so damaging for him. Is that Biden's entire pitch... like, the Tara Reade allegations, like, if it weren't for COVID-19, like, I'm pretty sure, I think because of the allegations, his campaign would be very, very, very unlikely to succeed. Oh, Trump? Yeah, that's very relatable. He substitutes a hatred for politicians. He uses that to project a sense that he's not corrupt, right? He's like, I can't be corrupt because I hate politicians. But Biden also has a bit of that image, right? He's a career politician, but he doesn't present like one, and that's really beneficial to him. Yeah, Biden has, throughout his life, which is why, people like me liked him until we found out everything about his voting record. As vice president, he was pretty popular because he was goofy, he gaffed a lot, but he had no legislative agenda that we knew of. Of course, he, behind the scenes, was tanking, really important things like, and I think one of his biggest legislative, I hesitate to call it scandal because he paid no political price for it, but dumb, out-of-touch grandpa. Now, that was endearing. And when it came time to campaign, he projected confidence, right? His pitch is the dumb out of... No, I'm so dumb. The dumb out of touchiness, it's just an impression. I'm a guy who knows how to get things done. And he has a record that shows that he gets things done. It's just the things that he gets done are not very good for the country, in my opinion. But more importantly as importantly as that, he hits Trump on decency. Touchiness. That was an unintentional joke there. But it's very much in touch, if you know what I mean. But he projects that decency, right? That most Democratic politicians don't have in their image. And that's why, you don't see the Republicans going after his record. They will later on, but the thing that they were trying to make stick, were Burisma and Tara Reid, because they want to ruin the notion that Biden is decent. That's the first thing they want to do. Do you think Biden will embarrass himself? I feel like that would hurt the value of decency in this election. Debates don't affect anything. I mean, they can, but this is not... Yeah, I think all of those things. I think campaigning can make a difference in an election, but at the end of the day, campaigning only makes a difference if there's a difference to be made. Campaigning makes a difference in close elections. I think that with the right campaign, Bernie could have snowballed. But there were definitely mistakes made in Bernie's campaign. Could he have won the nomination with those better effective campaigning tactics? Maybe, maybe not. There's a huge number of factors, right? Because the idea would be that a better campaign from Bernie would have given Democrats less of a reason to interfere. It would have made them look worse for organizing in the ways that they did, right? There were clear mistakes that Bernie made that were, kind of political character flaws he has. Not schmoozing a little bit with James Clyburn, because he doesn't have that in his repertoire. He doesn't schmooze. That's part of his appeal, right? Is he has a similar appeal to Trump, is that he's not a politics as usual guy. God dang it. Yeah, this is going to be an interesting election either way, no matter how the cards fall. Terrifying, but interesting. Sure to go up? Oh my god. Well, yeah, I mean, they always do, right? In any joblessness streak. Because, there's a decent portion, especially of middle-aged men who are not going to get any jobs back. They're not going to find work ever again. Anytime you have a spike in unemployment, there's a percentage of those people who are just not going to get jobs ever. And the government keeps saying, retrain, and Democrats are doing it right now. And it's shameful. A lot of those people are not going to get their jobs back. They need to be provided for. Retrain to play Fortnite? Oh, yeah. I mean, I can. If I practice Fortnite for 3 hours a day for 2 months, my cousin's gotten pretty good at Fortnite. And all he does is he plays Fortnite for an hour a day. Don't do that to yourself. I'm not saying I will, but it is completely within the realm of possibility because I'm young enough to be able to retrain. I can adapt my content to whatever it needs to be. And I have the ability to get decent at any game. Because I'm young, right? Oh, I feel bad. I never saw the kid from the follow from Ugly Kid. Well, thank you for the follow, Ugly Kid, if you happen to watch the VOD. No. No.